And so, like, first pick, Anthony Pettis, completely defensible pick, but would have gotten fucking thrashed by Khabib. Like, that's an awful matchup for Anthony Pettis. And then their second pick, they had between Felder and Iaquinta. And I really think, like, the fact that Felder's on a reasonably impressive 3-fight winning streak may have been the reason he was unfit. Whereas, for some reason, Al Iaquinta, whose only win in the last 3 years is over Diego Sanchez, was perfectly acceptable as an opponent.
Well, that's because Conor Khabib is going to do 2 million buys.
Of course.
If and when it ever happens.
Like, yeah, which is why they went from disavowing Khabib to disavowing McGregor to ending their own video of Conor McGregor smashing the bus with footage of Khabib promising Conor that he'll fight him. So, like, they very quickly decided this is better as advertising than as something to feel bad about.
This is why the thing that just kills me about this shit is, like, Conor McGregor probably going to end up paying out a few $100,000, maybe $1 million in fines and settlements as a result of all this shit, and he probably made himself $4 or $5 million in hype for a future fight with Khabib.
Yeah, this was, I believe, by a good margin, their most successful episode of Embedded ever.
Yeah, it's already done something like 4 or 5 million views.
Yeah, it was at like 3.9 last night, and it's been going up really quickly. And I think McGregor's videos with Nate Diaz or Jose Aldo were the most recent, like the last benchmark.
Yeah, it was the Nate Diaz 2 ones. And that was in super high with the bottle throwing at the press conference.
Oh yeah. But that was in like the 2 million range. This has already surpassed it.
So this shit is just, you can't teach that motherfucker any lessons. There are no lessons to be taught.
Oh, like, no.
the only thing that's going to bring Conor McGregor down is going to be when he has to have his septum fixed. He's going to have his septum fixed, and then somebody's going to punch him in the nose, and his whole face is going to break. Yeah. And you're going to be like, oh, that's what it took. So it will literally have been Conor McGregor bringing himself down.
Yep, when he has to graciously accept the donation of Artem Lobov's nose to replace his original weapon. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Heavy Hands. I am Connor Ruebusch, and apparently this is the episode where we say things twice. I am joined, as always, by Dr. Patrick Wyman, and today we have last week's violence and next week's violence, a familiar theme, but we're also coming into this episode on the heels of an extremely normal week of MMA coverage in the world of the UFC. Nothing untoward or unexpected happened during fight week for UFC 223. And I am having, I'm just very excited, Pat, to talk about, we're in a rhythm, so I'm just excited to do the same thing we always do with no interesting or novel topics whatsoever. How about you?
Yeah, I'm looking forward to discussing Khabib Nurmagomedov's victory over Tony Ferguson. Totally normal way this event went down. Anthony Pettis versus Michael Chiesa. You see that fight between Artem Lobov and Alex Caceres? My God.
It was exactly the comically absurd shit show I was hoping for. It was everything and more. And have we laid it on thick enough?
Jesus. I can't even keep this. It's just like, it makes my heart hurt, like thinking about the card that might have been and the event that might have been. Not that the event that we were left with was bad by any stretch of the imagination. I think we could have done far, far worse. But going from like Khabib Ferguson, this fight that we've been waiting for fucking ever, to Khabib Holloway, pretty good, to Khabib Iaquinta, also minus 3 other fights.
Yep.
Like that, all right.
It was, it was hard to keep up with, to say the least, during the last week. It was hard to know exactly. Like, I stayed offline for 2 days of the week, and everything had changed by the time I came back. The UFC's perspective on McGregor, who they were tapping to fill in for Ferguson, how many fights were left in the card, just everything kept changing. The rug just being...
In the context of the UFC in 2018, 2 days offline, you might as well be fucking Rip Van Winkle, man. Like, just waking up a generation later and not recognizing anything around you. What year is it?
Oh my God, Artem Lobov is dead. Everything.
Do the Robin Williams and Jumanji thing where you just like bearded and unkempt coming out of the jungle, like no idea what's going on. It takes 2 days for that to happen in the UFC in 2018.
This is why people don't hear this, but every one of our recording sessions starts with both of us greeting each other, bewildered, saying, "Pat, it's me," and we don't recognize each other for at least the first 5 minutes of our conversation.
Despite several hundred episodes together.
Yeah, but so much has changed between each one that it's just really hard to keep the radar in check. Anyway, okay, so let's talk about what actually did happen with this fight card. All kinds of shit went down. Again, very difficult to follow the changes, but what we ended up with was an abbreviated UFC 223 with 9 fights instead of the originally intended 12. Unfortunately, several fights that both you and I spent time talking about were removed from the card, but the main event was salvaged, if not entirely saved. That was, as you mentioned, Khabib Nurmagomedov versus Iaquinta, the number 11 lightweight in the UFC, according to official rankings. So we'll talk about that first off, and then we're going to get into the co-main event as well. That was, of course, the rematch between now reigning undisputed women's strawweight champion Rose Namajunas, who won her first title defense against Joanna Jędrzejczyk in a very competitive, very exciting fight, which, for my money, should have been the main event of this card the moment that Holloway pulled out. But either way, it definitely lived up to that sort of expectation because it was an excellent fight. And then we're going to get into some of the undercard before moving on to a couple of brief previews of next week's UFC blah blah whatever, featuring Dustin Poirier versus Justin Gaethje, which, after all of this, I almost feel too exhausted to even comprehend that fight is in just 7 days. But needless to say, I'm still very excited to talk about it. So let's get into Khabib Iaquinta. First things first, Pat. Khabib looked like absolute dog shit. Everybody's saying it, okay? People are saying it, and there's no way around it. He's a clown. He's been propped up this whole time, and absolutely any other lightweight on the roster except for Iaquinta would have savaged him on this night. Agree?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, this is like you mentioned earlier, Connor, and I think you were absolutely right about this, is like you have seen more MMA journalists reacting to the perception of criticism for Khabib than maybe actually exists from the fan base. To the extent, I think that's probably mostly right. I think most people are like, yeah, whatever, and are not actively shitting on Khabib for this performance. But we do need to acknowledge, you and I are both don't mind Joe Rogan. Don't mind him at worst. Think he's pretty good at best. He did not. This narrative of like an unimpressive or a Khabib or a Khabib who's just waiting for somebody to beat the crap out of him, that kind of began and ended with Joe Rogan. Yeah.
And I guess, while we're calling people out, it didn't help that now important public figure Brendan the Goldfish Schaub also jumped on the Khabib would have lost to anyone else on the roster tonight sort of train, along with the direction Joe seemed to be headed with his commentary.
Yeah, I can't imagine getting your MMA technical analysis via text from Brendan Schaub. Like, that's...
I mean, that's the peak of luxury.
I understand that there is a large audience for Fighter and the Kid, and I'm okay. Do your thing. Listen to that. Like, but the idea of listening to anything Brendan Schaub has to say about technique with a lot of attention and caring what he has to say about that's bizarre to me. And getting it via text message format, like short bursts, is somehow worse.
But you're right. Watching this fight, like Joe Rogan was. There has to be, I don't know if that actually did create much of a narrative. Doubtless it did with some fans. But really, I think a lot of media members were reacting to the way that Joe Rogan viewed this fight as it went down. And really, I think this has strong parallels to what we saw in John Jones's fight with Ovince St. Preux, where we just saw a performance in which the fighter who was expected to dominate thoroughly dominated the bout, but didn't do so quite impressively enough to satisfy everyone's expectations of an utter shutout. And we can talk about the reasons for that, but we should be reminded, like, we're still looking at a performance in which Khabib won on at least two judges' scorecards, a 50-43 card, a decision that was so obvious even before it was announced that Iaquinta himself was making jokes when they were reading the scorecards, silently miming, crossing his fingers and whatnot, saying, "Is it me? Is that my scorecard?" Because obviously Khabib Nurmagomedov dominated this fight and won every round. He just didn't look
the crap out of him.
Yeah.
He absolutely beat the crap out of Iaquinta. He beat the crap out of him on the ground. He effortlessly controlled him. And in the exchanges on the feet, Iaquinta did not win the striking matchup in this fight.
No.
In fact, he got soundly outlanded.
He got outboxed, motherfucker. He got completely outboxed. So,
yeah,
like, it can't look that bad for Khabib, right?
Yeah, I want to look up the exact numbers here because I'm very curious about this. Khabib outlanded Iaquinta at distance 100-41.
What was our good friend Phil McKenzie at Evil Greg Jackson? I think he said on Twitter something along the lines of, "Boy, it was a very close fight. Only a couple of early 10-8 rounds, over 100 significant strikes landed, and total domination happens to be the slim difference between these two fighters. But it really could have gone either way."
Yeah, and so this was my favorite thing here. So the third round, a round contested entirely on the feet. Khabib went 0 for 1 on takedowns. Khabib outlanded Iaquinta 37-7.
Yep. I mean,
37-7 at distance.
I come away from this fight feeling better about Khabib than I did about John Jones after that OSP fight. And even then, we saw that Jones returned to form. Whether with, the aid of whatever chemicals, whether that changes your opinion of his performances, it doesn't really have much of a bearing on mine, because I don't know what he was doing during his worst performances either. But
different chemicals.
Yeah, just subpar chemicals. But, clearly he was capable of coming back from that performance. Mookie Alexander did a great piece on Bloody Elbow where he kind of talked about the unrealistic expectations that go into a one day before the fight. That's how much time Khabib Nurmagomedov had. He probably didn't spend any of that time even thinking about Iaquinta and did basically all of his solving and figuring out in the cage. And as a result, maybe he did not run through his opponent with the usual practiced precision, as if he has been preparing every single move for this guy for the last 8 weeks, which, he usually has been. But, yeah, look at the fucking numbers. Watch the fight again. He's still, he only got hit when he was truly being careless, and I think he could have gotten hit less than he did, and was just sort of just coasting his way easily after winning the first 2 rounds his usual way.
Yeah. If you can just win entire rounds by doing nothing but sticking a jab in the face of a guy who is supposed to be a pretty decent striker, Iaquinta is not a bad striker. We cannot say this enough. He's probably among the 15 or 20 best strikers in the deepest division in MMA.
Yeah, he's up there with him.
Yeah, that sound about right. He's not the quickest, he's not the most powerful, but in terms of technical skill and kind of weird jankiness and understanding of technique and rhythm, he is a very, very good striker. Yeah. Khabib, never having seen any tape of him, never having sparred anybody who was trying to simulate him, managed to soundly beat him up on the feet. And not just via fear of the takedown. It's not like everything he was doing was based off the fear of the shot or fear of the clinch. He was in stretches where it was nothing but striking. Khabib soundly outstruck him.
He just busted
mostly with an up jab.
He just busted his face apart with an up jab. Just casually picked him apart. I don't. If anything, here's an angle. This is maybe a little too conspiratorial for some, but if anything, I can entertain the notion that Khabib deliberately did not put his foot on the gas in order to, put a little catnip out there for somebody like Conor McGregor. Like, oh, here's Khabib. Oh, no, he had an unexpectedly disappointing performance where he still easily won and took no damage. But look, he didn't look as good as usual. And frequently, in boxing, that works. That you can put on a lackluster performance if you're a sort of avoided or avoidable fighter and use that to draw in potential matchups. Maybe that's what's happening. Either way, it ends up being a positive for the UFC and a positive for Khabib. And I don't doubt that we're going to see more vintage Khabib in future matchups, just as we saw more vintage John Jones, despite his own lackluster title, performance.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's easy to look at this and say, oh, there were moments where Khabib looked like kind of human, as opposed to the exceptionally inhuman that he has looked through most of his UFC career. But I think the way to turn that on its head is to say that, and to get at kind of what makes this performance, at least to me, really interesting, is that he fought against type for long stretches of this fight by choice, not because he was forced to, but by choice. Right. He decided to stick and move. He decided to fight differently than we have ever seen him fight before, and looked pretty good doing it. Just it was like he was putting in sparring time in this fight, which not enough guys do in MMA. I'm glad that you brought up the boxing comparison. Not enough guys do this in MMA, where you're in there with a guy that you're clearly better than, and you just kind of decide, okay, let's try some things out. And so I think afterward, didn't Khabib say he had been watching a lot of Muhammad Ali this week and wanted to try it out?
Yeah, somebody critiqued his style of head movement, and he blamed it on having watched too much Muhammad Ali over the last week. So, but he was totally relaxed. He was just doing what he felt like.
Yeah, but fights in MMA come so rarely that we don't often see guys just kind of playing and messing around. And, good for Khabib that he could do that. And I think it shows off another facet of his game, which is that it's a mistake, I think, to categorize Khabib as just the take you down and grind you out guy, or just the kind of grind you in the clinch, or just the pressure fighter. I think what we saw here, and this probably bodes pretty well for him over the long run, if he's going to be doing this for 3 or 4 more years, is that he does have some stylistic flexibility in his game. Yeah. That he does feel comfortable doing other things.
It's a mistake specifically to believe that his, the sort of the crazy recklessness that embodies some of his pressure striking is just inherent to all of his striking technique. When he's not pressuring, he can turn that crazy sloppiness down and look pretty good. He looked like he knew how to box. And unsurprisingly, I think I have been hearing little whispers here and there about how competitive Khabib is in various forms of hard sparring with the likes of Daniel Cormier in the gym, where he can just compete with Daniel Cormier. And that looks like somebody who has, that performance looked like somebody who had competed with Daniel Cormier, just to put it like that, completely unfazed by anything that was happening, ready to adapt. And when he made a mistake, he didn't beat himself up about it. He was like, okay, I'm just going to hit him with 6 more jabs. And we're done wrestling because I guess I don't feel like it. In a way, I don't know. That's kind of more impressive than it could have been. I still maybe would have liked to see Khabib wrestle, but it's good to know that there is this much breadth and depth to his game. Is there anything else you want to say about this?
Real quick, I wanted to come back to his defense.
Sure.
Because I think there was some criticism leveled in that direction by the commentators. You mentioned that a media member mentioned it to him. You and I talked about it a little bit before we started recording today. I think that's another area where Khabib maybe doesn't get enough credit because it looks kind of weird or janky. The way he was kind of pulling back from shots, the head movement, the way he sometimes looks like he's kind of waving at shots that come in. The aggregate effect of all that is really effective. That if you're not throwing 3 or 4 shots at him, it is very difficult to stick him with a clean shot. Edson Barboza landed 32% of his strikes in that fight. And he landed, let me see, of headshots, Edson Barboza went 6 for 47.
Yeah, normally very few of his landed shots were counters at all.
Yeah. Iaquinta went 27 to 117 to Khabib's head in this fight.
Yeah.
Michael Johnson, let me look this up here. Michael Johnson went all of 9 for 51 to Khabib's head. So it is just not easy to hit the dude, I think is what I'm getting at. So it's worth bearing in mind there. Those dudes are not the world's cleanest, most accurate punchers. They're not Conor McGregor accurate in terms of placing their shots, who's at this point, I think, one of the gold standards for placing a perfect shot. Those guys are not him. But they're also not the kinds of dudes who just wave at air consistently.
Yeah.
They're reasonably accurate punchers.
Yeah, they are deliberate punchers at the very least. And yeah, I understand. We were saying this before. I guess we'll recap our pre-show discussion here. But I do understand complaining about like the way in which Khabib goes about his defense, because there are potential problems there. Like in the same way I critiqued Iaquinta last week for being such a front foot boxer. It's not that style can't be made to work, or that there aren't circumstances in which it works particularly well. It's just that, you know, I wouldn't call that like my favorite textbook way of doing things, because it has some glaring vulnerabilities. There are some obvious ways to change your approach to it, and that will allow you to solve that kind of defense. And Khabib's display here was more or less the same. Like, I don't feel like he would have defended as casually as he did if Iaquinta had been coming at him with a different approach. But because Iaquinta was throwing largely single shots and otherwise mostly just following Khabib around for the better part of 3 rounds, it was like, do your Ali thing. Works fine. You know, like, he's putting himself out of position. He can't respond with counters, but he didn't need to at all. And he was just pot-shotting his way to an easy victory. So I can't really complain about it. I don't think we would see that level of casual defense against somebody like Conor McGregor. I do believe, however, we would still be surprised at how difficult Khabib was to hit clean against a lot of strikers that we would have maybe before expected to hit him easily. He absolutely has an awareness of what's going on the feet, at least.
Yeah, it's, you know, one more thing to say about this before we go on. We've mentioned this a couple of times beforehand, but like, hard sparring is getting a kind of a bad rap these days as a major cause of the many injuries that derail fights in MMA. Hard sparring is also very good for teaching you exactly the kinds of things that Khabib shows off, like a willingness to adjust and play, the tendency not to panic, the ability to defend shots on the fly in kind of wild exchanges. Like, that's a lot of that stuff is very, very hard to teach kind of systematically, and can only be learned under pressure, or is best learned under pressure. And Khabib shows off a lot of the best aspects of fighters who have done a lot of hard sparring. But so one more question here. We know that there's kind of a buffet of potential guys who are there that Khabib could fight now as the, I guess, undisputed champion. Though, note the UFC in that embedded video still crediting Conor McGregor, UFC lightweight champion.
Now we just have 3 UFC lightweight champions, depending on which promo package they want to run this week.
This is, I'm going to make a medieval joke for a second. This is like the great schism of the papacy in the late Middle Ages. Just pick a pope, go with them. You know, you got three options. You can make an argument for any of them.
Tony Ferguson brings new meaning to the term anti-pope. Really?
Yeah. Just pick a guy. Could be any of them. So, but who do you want to see? Do you want to see them try to make the Ferguson fight again? Doubt that's going to happen.
No.
You want to see him try and fight Max Holloway? Do you want to see Conor McGregor? What do you want?
Yeah, no. Ferg Khabib is cursed. You know, either Ferguson or Khabib has to lose first before that fight can happen. The moment one of them loses, remake that fight, because the curse magic will be broken. But until then, I'm over it. It's been scheduled 4 times now. Let's move on to something else. And if that fight is still possible in like a year or 2, then we'll do it then. I'm sure it'll still be fun. Khabib Conor seems like the direction they want to go in. I have no problem whatsoever with seeing that fight. And I think that seems like the obvious choice, because otherwise, like, what else is going on at lightweight? Who else is, right there at the door of a title shot?
I mean, you could probably throw Eddie Alvarez in there after that fight against Justin Gaethje and not feel too bad about it.
Sure. Oh yeah, and I think Eddie Alvarez is probably one of the tougher matchups in the division for Khabib.
Yeah, if Dustin Poirier wins, something we're going to talk about a little bit later, you could probably do Poirier Khabib and feel pretty good about that fight too.
But, you know, McGregor's getting a slap on the wrist. All of this has already become advertising and promotional material. Just make that fight. That's what they want to do. You know, how much more Conor McGregor are we really going to get? The man is imploding. He's self-destructing at incredible speed. So just make that fight so that they don't have to meet in an alley somewhere, you know, with like a Russian gang and an Irish gang both.
This is something I think, and I don't want to get too derailed on this tangent because we have lots of other things we got to talk about today, but like, this is actually one of the things I think Conor McGregor has learned from watching boxing, is that you don't have to make the fight right away. You can tease it a little bit. Yeah. You can draw it out, you know, like we've been talking about Khabib McGregor for year and a half now. maybe even longer. The first time we really started talking about it was after McGregor Alvarez, because Khabib cut that amazing promo where he turns to Dana White and he says, "I want to fight with your chicken."
That's right.
So we've been talking about this now for a year and a half. Like, you don't have to do that shit right away. You can sit on it a little bit. You can let it marinate, and you can let it ripen before you pluck the fruit. And maybe we're now at the point where the fruit plucking is ripe. I guess it depends on the size of McGregor's legal bills.
Yeah. But that is a lesson that is easier to learn, it must be said, when you make several normal fighters' salaries per fight. You then have the time and the luxury to sit out and just start cooking up narratives, and also, sort of throwing away your professional life in other forms, but still making sure the world's still interested in you. And the UFC is clearly not shy about joining McGregor in setting up this potential matchup. So just do it. It's fine. All right, why don't we take a break, actually, because we spent a good bit of time talking about Khabib versus Iaquinta and the future implications of that perplexing victory. After this, we are going to talk about Namajunas versus Gaethje 2, a fight that deserves a whole lot of discussion of its own, and then we are going to get on to some undercard bouts from 223 before moving on to the main event and I think one undercard bout. If I don't literally have the tab with the schedule in it, Pat, I have no idea what's happening at any moment. I don't know what we're talking about next, but I know there's going to be Namajunas and Gaethje, okay? So one step at a time. All of that after this. Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out, the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it. And welcome back to Heavy Hands. While interesting things are happening in the lightweight division, the strawweight division has a certified new queen. Rose Namajunas defended the belt she won against Joanna Jędrzejczyk last year in a very impressive 5-round decision over the same woman here in the co-main event of UFC 223. Pat, I loved this fight. I thought it was everything I had hoped for. I felt that Joanna vindicated her last performance, and yet once again Rose Namajunas exceeded my expectations. She did everything I thought she was capable of and more. We saw a 5-round battle with multiple adjustments and momentum swings from both women. What were your thoughts on the proceedings?
So I thought both she and Joanna looked better.
Yes.
I thought that this was a better version of their very brief first fight. It was because right out of the gate, I thought it looked a lot like their first fight did, in the sense that, and I thought like right from the get go, like, oh, Joanna's going to get knocked out again if she's fighting like this. And there were a couple of points where, if a shot had landed just a little bit cleaner, she probably would have been out. But she adjusted. She made really good adjustments to what Rose was showing her. She found her range. The biggest thing that Joanna did, I thought, was her eyes were much more open this time, especially when they were exchanging. Like, she stopped flinching after about the first 2 minutes of the second round. And so she was taking Rose's shots a lot better. She wasn't biting on feints quite the same way.
Yeah.
So Namajunas adjusted. Namajunas found fantastic adjustments to the adjustments. She sought out exchanges more than she did earlier. So early on, it looked like her game plan was to kind of dart in and out, much the way she did the first time, and then counter the counter. When she got Joanna to throw back at her, she countered that. What she did late in the fight, as her mobility got impaired, was instead of trying to get in, then get out, and maybe counter the counter, she was just like, okay, I'm going to bite down and throw because I'm better in these spaces than Joanna is. I'm better here. This is not just a kind of an attempt to create this tactical situation where I can land a shot and then get out safely. It's like, no, I'm going to brawl her and I'm going to be better in the brawl. I thought it was exceptionally intelligent to go that route because if she had tried to keep doing the darting in and out thing, the kind of stick and move type of thing, I think she would have continued to get her legs and her body chewed up by the volume and by the slightly longer reach. Like as you suspected, Connor, Rose's explosiveness diminished over the course of the fight, right?
Yeah.
And part of that was the cardio, part of that was the kind of cumulative damage that Ioana did to her. But instead of that being the end of it, Rose found that adjustment.
Yeah, well, because unlike in the Carla Esparza fight, now Rose has a serious bedrock of technique to fall back on. So, like, the explosiveness wasn't there, but she could still hit hard and attack with authority and be respected by Jędrzejczyk. Demand respect from Jędrzejczyk because she has really good boxing technique. She's quite good at this and is getting better. How much does this say, Pat, about Rose Namajunas' poise and maturity mentally as a fighter compared to what we've seen from her in the past? Because this had this been Rose Namajunas a year and a half ago, the way that those leg kicks were taking their toll, the way that Jędrzejczyk's jab was starting to pop her head back a bit, the way that the momentum was clearly swinging in the third and fourth rounds of this fight would have almost certainly led, in my mind, to a Jędrzejczyk win. It would have been Jędrzejczyk in the last 3 rounds, and probably more clearly with each round as Rose felt the mental pressure of all of the adjustments Ioana was making. And instead, Rose was perfectly capable of making a 5th round adjustment of her own and turning into a tiny Lithuanian Terminator to win a really impressive 5th championship round. I mean, it feels like she's over it, right?
Yeah, Yes, I think she probably is, but I also think that as strange as it sounds when we're talking about by far the greatest strawweight of all time in terms of resume in Ioana Jędrzejczyk, there is a way in which Rose is the perfect, is just stylistic kryptonite for her, And I think the question still remains of how would Rose react if the pressure were more relentless?
Sure.
And so that's why now, not to take this too far into the future, but that's really why I want to see her fight Jessica Andrade, is because Andrade is not going to let up, right? Like you are going to need to stick to something for 5 full rounds to be able to beat Andrade. You can't mess around. You can't take time off. If you do, the momentum is going to just build and build and build and build.
Yeah.
So I think you're probably right. But the question, but I still have a question of, like, if Ioana had just committed a little bit more to marching Rose down, would she have been able to build her momentum a little bit better? Because she like, it has to be said, Ioana wanted a range striking matchup. Like,
yes.
When she got into the clinch, she was very effective, but she never pressed for the clinch. And now a large part of that was the distance management from Namajunas. She made it difficult to get there in the first place. She didn't stick around in the pocket. She didn't allow herself to get manhandled really for longer than she needed to. But Ioana also was not consistently trying to hunt her down. She was not trying to press her to the fence. She wanted to put a little pressure on her, but she wasn't like trying to take away her space. It didn't seem to me.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because this aspect of the fight sort of clarifies several parts of the lead up, right? I think we can say, I feel like I can say, yes, the weight cut in the first fight was a significant factor for Jędrzejczyk. She clearly felt better here. She looked, right from the jump, she looked a lot faster. She looked much, much quicker, much more agile. She was getting in and out of range with a lot more alacrity than she was last time. She also looked, obviously, more durable, where she was shaken up by every clean punch Rose landed in the first fight. And this one, she was taking them well. It definitely still... That's why I had the same feeling as you in that first round. I was like, oh, she's going to get knocked out. But then she was taking the shots, and she was responding to them and staying clear-eyed. And so that, to me, says, yes, the weight cut was really hard in her last time. It was better this time. That made a difference. But everything people were saying last week about how, well, if she keeps talking about how it was the weight cut, then that allows her not to change anything about her approach. She's just going to blame the weight cut and come in expecting to win the exact same fight. That seems like that was true too. And that's a little more worrying to me, because looking at that first fight, it was impossible for me not to see, I can look at that and see some sluggishness, some unusual temerity out of, not temerity, but timidness out of Jędrzejczyk and whatever. But I can also see a bad style matchup and in a way of approaching that style matchup that led to a surprising first round finish. And doesn't seem like Jacek or her team really saw that side of it. You know, like she did come in here, even the adjustments she was making, which were very good, they were kind of the same adjustments she tried to make last time. They were just a little more drawn out, a little more patient, and a little more clear-headed. But she was still doing these quick counter combinations, still trying to fight off the back foot on the outside, using the jab. She's very good at it, and it definitely still got her into the fight and won her, I thought, and I think you agreed, 2 rounds. But
yeah. I mean, I think what you're pointing to is something that's built into Jacek's DNA as a fighter, and it's both her strength and her weakness, and that's that she is an exceptionally rote fighter. So if you spend all camp teaching her specific things, because she's not going to watch the tape herself. She does not like watching tape. She doesn't. That's not how she approaches things. She trusts her coaches. So if you as a coach make the decision that you think this is the right way to fight Rose Namajunas, that is how Joanna Jędrzejczyk is going to fight her.
Right.
That's like, so if you think like just some subtle pressure every now and again, but you are going to win a range striking matchup. If you think that's the thing to do, then that's the way she's going to fight her for 5 rounds, and she'll make adjustments, but she'll make adjustments within the parameters that you've set for her.
Yeah. Which again, as you've just painted it, is not necessarily a bad thing. You can use that to your advantage. Ruben Olivares was a phenomenal boxer in the bantamweight division and was much the same way. One of the best of all time, but had a harder time adjusting than he did just sticking to a game plan. He could fight a lot of different ways, but you had to provide him with the blueprint before the fight began, or you were only going to get the one fight he was prepared for out of him. And it's worrying to me that Jędrzejczyk, like based on that framing, Jędrzejczyk's team, who I had a lot of faith in to prepare a good game plan for her, didn't. They didn't make any adjustments. They didn't see that Rose's reach was going to be a problem. They didn't see that Rose was quickly becoming one of the very best boxers in the division, and that not only that, she was starting to have faith in the power in her hands, as she was throwing combinations with authority in a way she never had before. And that was a problem for Joanna. Like as you said, she should have pushed forward. I think Joanna, well, I mean, all 3 judges didn't give her the 3rd round, which I did find kind of perplexing, but still, on my scorecard, she could have won this fight if she had just used Rose's pressure against her in the 5th round alone to get the clinch. If she had, because Rose was stalking her and coming forward and throwing punches, just slide inside one of those combos, grab her neck, and launch a few knees, and don't let go. Because in the 10 seconds you clinched with her at the end of round 2, you landed like 7 clean shots and then never went back to that phase.
Yeah, this is one of those things where we don't know if there are factors here that we're not aware of, right?
Sure.
And so one of those might be that they were maybe a lot more afraid about Joanna's chin than we were going in. And they thought that, like, if we commit to pressuring her, if we commit to stalking and really try to get her into the pocket, she's going to eat too many shots and one of those is going to take her out. Like, we don't know what they've seen in watching her spar, and maybe she's been dropped in sparring. Maybe they're seeing, like, she is increasingly taking shots poorly as time goes on. That's entirely possible. That is a variable that's there. Maybe she might have had some kind of injury that made it uncomfortable to clinch for long periods of time. Maybe they were still worried about the weight cut, and they thought that if we do a lot of clinch grappling here, that's going to wear Joanna down to the point where she's not going to be able to fight effectively.
But when Rose is walking you down,
just
stop retreating.
I'm right there with you. Like I'm just saying, it's always worth bearing in mind that there may be variables that we are not aware of that led them to prepare her the way that they did. Even if I think it's a mistake, right? Like you and I are very much on the same page here. We both see this. We saw it beforehand. We mentioned it. We talked about this in our brief
as one of the keys to Joanna winning this time. I mean, I was still impressed with how well she did without having the game plan I thought she needed to win. And I do think, like, she looked like her old self. It's just like, Rose is a hard fight for her. And that's becoming clearer and clearer with each round we see between them. Rose is just not an easy opponent for Jędrzejczyk. The way her mind works, the way her style is put together, Rose offers a lot of problems.
So let's kind of wrap this up, because we do have other stuff we got to get to.
Yes.
Question number 1. Do you want to see a third fight between the two of them?
No.
You feel like after now 5.5, 6 rounds, you've seen everything you need to see between Namajunas and Jacek?
I'm 100% certain it would be an entertaining fight, but it would, as somebody who, as apparently the last man online who is still a fan of Joanna and Jacek, who has not jumped off the bandwagon just because she lost, I feel like she would just take more damage and would still probably lose a closely contested fight. That at this point in her career, like Rose has time to waste on that kind of stuff. I think Joanna's got to move up to 125, as she said she was planning to do. I don't know if she will. She's been like giving out cautions to the strawweight division, and maybe that would be cool too if she could work her way back through the ranks and remind everyone of why we were all so enamored with her style before. But I'm not really interested in seeing this right away again. And who knows, the division might be wide open for Joanna if now Rose goes on to fight Andrade, because Andrade still seems very likely to beat her.
Okay, so that was going to be my next question. So for Joanna, you think she should move up to 125 and start to till those rather more fertile fields?
Yeah, I mean, why not?
Yeah, that's. I mean, could you imagine Rose against like Nico Montano and Barb Honchak, like, or Joanna against those fighters? Like, that's
rough waters.
Yeah, I mean, aside from Valentina Shevchenko, which is obviously the fight that we really want here, like, Joanna is definitely the second best flyweight out there, at least the second best, and maybe the best. We don't know. So, okay, and so for Rose, you think Andrade is the right fight there?
Yeah, probably. Unless they want to do a rematch. I would also be down for a rematch between Rose and Carolina. Now that Carolina got that win over Felice Herrig, that was a competitive fight last time in which Rose just sort of fell apart. You definitely get the feeling now it wouldn't go that way this time, or it would at least shake out differently. So I would like to see that as well. But Andrade is probably the logical choice. She's just gonna, like, Andrade is one of those fighters who I have a hard time seeing her ever be like a long reigning champ, unless the likes of Jacek just completely leave the division. But she is always going to be waiting in the wings to thrash whoever wins the belt and give them a serious mental test. So yeah, why not throw Andrade in there?
Yeah, if you win consecutive fights, entertaining, really good fights over Claudia Gadelha and Tecia Torres, you deserve a title shot.
Oh yeah.
So with all that wrapped up, let's talk about some of the other action from this card. You want to start with Renato Moicano and Calvin Kattar, or
let's do it?
Okay. So, we were both wrong about this. I think we both picked Calvin Kattar, right?
Uh-huh. Both picked Calvin Kattar, liked the way that he adapted to his opponents. He definitely did some adjusting in this one, made some nice moves going into the third round. But Renato Moicano is like, he's ice cold, dude. He continues to impress. He also, his own ability to adjust and to stay calm and stick to what he's doing is phenomenal. And he figured out after a rough first couple of minutes, leg kicks are going to be there, and I can jab with this guy and leg kick him. And that was kind of the story of the fight. He just very impressively picked Kattar apart.
Dude, so this was wild watching this go down, because there's a lesson here.
Yeah.
And it's a lesson in looking at a whole fighter in terms of technique, as opposed to focusing too much on one aspect of a fighter's technique and letting that overrule your whole thing. So Renato Moicano looks a little janky when he throws punches, especially combinations, right?
Yeah.
But he might have some of the, outside of like Max Holloway, maybe Brian Ortega, Frankie Edgar, Jose Aldo, the guys at the very, very top of this division, he might have the best footwork in the division.
Oh, yeah.
Renato Moicano. Like, he has exceptionally crisp, technical, tight, and well-timed footwork. It is insanely good. Like, it is almost on a par with those guys that I just mentioned. Like, his sense of space is insane.
I mean, his fight with Jeremy Stevens had us all thinking, like, oh, Jeremy Stevens, well, we know how inconsistent he is. Maybe Jeremy Stevens is just like solidly at this point in his career where he's, the best he's ever been and really adaptable. And we've seen that in his last two fights. He can close somebody down who's trying to get away from him and throw combinations and light them up. Maybe he did the best he could to try that against Moicano and just couldn't get him to stand in one spot, could never get the chance to set his feet. Like, that seems a lot more believable now watching this. Moicano's angles and pivots, how light he stays in his feet is phenomenal. And also how well he can kick going backwards. Like, very rarely in this fight was he purely the one pushing forward. There were a few minutes at a time here and there. But being constantly forced to reset his feet and stay on the move, he still managed to do tremendous damage with low kicks.
And he's hard to hit clean, too.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Like, really hard to hit clean. Like, Brian Ortega threw 220 strikes at Renato Moicano and landed 29% of them in that fight. Like, he still landed a fair bit, but that was more a product of the fact that his pace was insane as opposed to Moicano being easy to hit. Calvin Kattar had a ton of trouble getting anywhere close enough to land good, clean shots. So it's a combination of distance, those pivots, those angles, and also, like, he moves his head pretty well. He does a good job of hiding his chin behind his shoulder as he throws. Like, the dude is very, very difficult to hit. Like, Kattar landed at the same rate as Brian Ortega did, 29%.
Which is nuts, because Kattar is a better, more consistent striker than Brian Ortega for sure. And Moicano, like, countering in combinations, you can point to the particulars of those combos and critique them and pick them apart, but keeping his feet moving, always responding in combination when he did have to respond, and, like, it looks kind of messy, but, like, so does some of Max Holloway's counterpunching. He still gets the shots home and still seems aware of what his position is and how to adjust it mid response. So
what he shares in common with Holloway, which is the kind of the key to this, is that he's always stepping with the correct foot as he throws. So when he throws a back stepping right hand, he is always stepping back with the right hand as he is throwing the right. Yeah. Or stepping back with the right foot as he's throwing the right hand. So that gives his shot surprising pop because it means his hip is always turning over in the correct direction as he's throwing.
And likewise, the punches may be a little wide and loose, but he still has structural integrity while he's throwing them. He's not super vulnerable.
Yes. That's exactly the right way to put it. I love that phrase, the structural integrity.
Yeah. He's still in a position. The shocks are still there. He can still absorb something coming back at him. And like Calvin Kattar looked good. He looked like himself in this fight. He put on a good performance. He did his best to do what he did to Burgos, right? Like, he had some moments in the first round. Maybe cinched that one. I can't quite recall how I scored it. Second round, definitely started swinging the way of Moicano. That was his. And Kattar came out hard, started pressuring, throwing combinations, doing everything he needed to do to bring the fight back in his direction. And Moicano just adjusted to him and stayed cool. And I should once again give a shout out to Phil McKenzie because he said essentially his key to this fight was the fact that Calvin Kattar did not check low kicks. And that really did end up being a significant factor. Moicano picked up on that the moment he realized he could land that leg kick with impunity. He started landing it with impunity. And yeah, it just looked like a really complete, impressive striker against another quite complete, impressive striker. So I love watching both these guys fight.
This is the thing about this, like, 3-division run between bantamweight and lightweight is just full of guys who in any other division might just be the best striker.
Oh yeah.
Like these, like the depth of like striking talent that goes all the way down, all the way through the top 15 in each of these divisions is insane. Yeah. Anywhere else. Like, welterweight has a few good strikers, but it's got a lot of really strong grapplers and wrestlers and clinch fighters and functional strikers. Lightweight, featherweight, and bantamweight are just full of dudes who would clean anybody's clock in another division. Like, Calvin Kattar would be one of the 3 or 4 best strikers on a technical level in the welterweight division, you know? No doubt. And he just got schooled by Renato Moicano in this fight. Who do you want to see Renato Moicano fight next? Like, he's not really a young dude. He's been fighting as a pro for 8 years. I think he's 28 or 29 years old. Like, he's a prime guy. There's no reason to kind of coddle him or take it slow on him. What matchup do you want to see here?
I say just throw him in the mix, man. I really think he's there, as you said, he's at the right point in his career. His game is continuing to blossom and evolve, but he has clearly found the style that works best for him. And can therefore, adjust to a wide variety of different matchups. I say, like, what are we looking at? Brian Ortega versus Holloway next. Who else is in the mix? Do you want to see Moicano versus Aldo? Do you want to see Moicano versus Edgar versus Swanson? Like, anybody in the top 5 would make for a very pleasant looking fight with Renato Moicano.
What do you think about Renato Moicano versus Darren Elkins?
Why the fuck not? That sounds awesome.
Think about the pace in that fight. The pace that Moicano can work out on the feet and not get tired. We've never seen Moicano get tired in a fight, right? But we've also seen him get taken down a few times. How is he? But here's the thing: like, as good as Moicano is on the feet, this is something I think people have only started paying attention to him since he turned into this kind of striker. He was a grappler.
That was his whole game before.
He was like a very high level black belt grappler with a really nasty front headlock choke game. And Darren Elkins is a guy who has a tendency of shooting his way into the front headlock regularly. Yeah. You know,
we're looking at a Jose Aldo type where like you go through all this effort to take him down, and only then you're like, oh shit, it doesn't stop. There's more to this game.
Yeah, so that's actually, I think, the fight that I would really like to see. Either that
Sounds
or
good.
Moicano against the winner of Mirsad Bektic and Ricardo Lamas.
That sounds good too. Yeah, you're taking. I mean, I think he's right in there. I guess I don't really know what's going on in the top 5 of featherweight now because
it's a weird division because aside from Holloway and Ortega, you've got that Edgar Swanson rematch that's coming up. You've got Jeremy Stevens, who's coming off that win over Josh Emmett. Then you've got like, it's a division that's waiting for its turnover to happen.
But I still have a super hard time. Like, I know that Aldo and Edgar are in more precarious positions than ever, but I still have a super hard time imagining which featherweights in particular beat the likes of Jose Aldo and Frankie Edgar.
Well, aside from, we just saw Ortega
do
it, but
aside from the two guys who have, like, who else in this division beats them? I still don't have a clear idea of who can.
Yeah, no, that's true. But that makes it really fun. It's in a really fun spot right now. We're going to see a lot of good shit. But speaking of other fun shit happening in the featherweight division, Zabit Magomedsharipov.
And some credit while we're talking about him to Kyle Bochniak, who did not get much shine coming into this matchup and did get largely dominated in this fight, but put on a hell of a show and gave Zabit the chance to like get exhausted and put on a bit of a barn burner in at least the third round. This was fun as hell, man. I really enjoyed this fight. First thing I want to say about Zabit, this motherfucker is ice cold. He is so calm and relaxed. It is terrifying. He looks like he's like walking to get his hair cut when Kyle Bochniak is coming at him throwing 8-punch power combinations. He's so chill. Like, where does that come from?
Dagestan, man. That's where it comes from.
I guess so.
You want the honest answer? It comes from Dagestan.
That's a good answer.
Dude, I have used this now a couple of times, but I'm sticking with it. Zabit looks like the toughest, most hardcore dungeon master of a D&D game at a liberal arts college, like a real fucking granola liberal arts college, you know. Zabit looks like the dude who runs the Wednesday night basement of the library D&D game, and yet he is who he is. So I mean, was there anything new that you noticed from Zabit in this fight? Was this more or less kind of what you expected? Skill-wise, what has he shown off? What did you see here?
What I found was, in fact, that he looked very, very happy to strike. We've seen him really showing off his ground game and going to that as his like most consistent way of beating opponents. Of course, you and I both know, like based on his pre-UFC fights, he can strike quite well. He knows how to use his reach. He's got very good footwork, and we've also seen a few flashes of brilliant counter-striking and like dazzling Showtime Pettis type spinning kicks and stuff as well since he's come to the UFC. I was, however, surprised that he was so willing to just stand with Kyle Bochniak. I think he just did it for the fuck of it because Bochniak came out swinging and Zabit was like, oh, it's this kind of fight. It was like, all right, I'm just going to slip shots in between these swings. And I'll take a few cuffing blows, but nothing's going to hit me that clean, even though I seem to just be essentially tucking my chin and moseying backwards with a loose guard. I know exactly which hand you're throwing with, where the shot is coming from, and I'm going to roll very slightly with it when it connects. He just looked like he wanted to have fun striking and ended up doing that.
Yeah, the thing that was really striking to me about this fight was we questioned how deep does Zabit's bag of tricks go, and now we know. Now we know how deep his bag of tricks go, and the answer is really deep, right? Like, he showed off a bunch of different responses to the pressure that Bochniak was throwing him, to the combinations that Bochniak was showing him. That kind of check left hook that Zabit landed over and over again was really tight. His defense looked pretty good. Like Bochniak had a ton of trouble finding his chin, both because of the range and then because of the kind of defensive moves that Zabit showed off.
It was like go on.
No, go ahead.
Well, I don't just say this just because I've been watching a boatload of James Toney fights lately, but like it was like old James Toney. You know, when Toney got like fat and always had a style that was kind of lazy in a cool way, but then he was like really, really lazy and just did as little work as possible in the ring and was still like skill wise way better than everyone he fought and looked like had he been in slightly better shape, he could have probably won every fight of his career. There were very few in which he looked really pressed, even if he was losing them. And that's how Zabit looked, like just half-assing his way out of range as Bochniak was just throwing lightning speed bombs at him. And he's just like walking backwards, head swaying slightly from one side to the other. And then boom, here's a little counter because you got a little too close with that last shot. Like more than the technique, the poise is what stood out. How chill he was under pressure. That more than anything says to me, this dude is ready for title implications. Throw him in there with the best. Nobody's going to scare him. He may very well lose. Bochniak had him in a precarious position at the end of that third round. Both guys were very tired, and who knows if Zabit would have recovered his wind and been able to come back if Bochniak was still fresh. You'd say there was a fourth round. Could Bochniak have won that fight? Maybe, because of the way he approached the third round. But it sure wouldn't have been because Zabit was losing his cool or wasn't ready for anything Bochniak was bringing to the table.
I'm not quite as sold on Zabit as competing with the very elite just yet. I think he needs kind of one more fight against an established guy to figure things out before he really starts getting stepped up, which is why I would like to see him against somebody like Miles Jury.
He called out Yair Rodriguez, which I would happily watch. Although
I would happily watch that, but I don't think we would learn anything new about Zabit from that. I think we would learn that he's a better boxer than Yair Rodriguez, and that he's a better wrestler, and that he could go hard for 15 minutes.
Yeah, and like, it would also, like, from a matchmaking perspective, it would further hamper the resurgence of Yair Rodriguez if he is still a fighter that the UFC wants to build, because since his fight with Frankie Edgar, it feels like the featherweight division is like there's a lot of new shit going on since then, you know?
Yeah, I mean, nobody has no idea what they're doing with him because he hasn't fought in a year, and I don't think he's been scheduled to fight either. Yeah.
I don't know.
So,
but now we have Zabit. You want to see Zabit versus Jury? That sounds pretty good. Zabit versus, but you wouldn't like think Zabit would have a reasonable shot of winning a fight with the likes of Chan Sung Jung or Ricardo Lamas. I think he could definitely win those kinds of matchups.
Sure, I do. I think the question is, at this point, it becomes less a question of what do you do with Zabit versus what are you trying to do with this division overall.
Okay, yeah.
So that's more my concern. In terms of skill wise, I could see him winning a fight. I could see him handily winning a fight against like a Ricardo Lamas or a Josh Emmett or a Jeremy Stevens. I could see him winning those for sure. Absolutely. No question. But you also at this point have a little bit of a line of rising young fighters built up. And the question is, do you just start having those guys fight each other? And maybe you build some storylines for years down the road once they've ascended to the top. Sure. Or do you really want to do the whole, okay, here's a veteran, beat the veteran, and then you're a top guy kind of thing? Which is what they should more or less be doing at welterweight. But here there are so many of these young guys all lined up that I kind of think you have to have them fight each other at some point.
Yeah,
so,
and unlike welterweight, like it feels a little less like the old guard are just hanging on. Like they still have some good performances in them. Each of like, if we're thinking of Aldo, Edgar, Lamas as like some old school top guys in this division, they've just suffered their first serious losses in a long time. So like they can probably still get some wins. They probably have a few years to hold their spot for the up and comers.
Yeah, as opposed to like the Maya, Lawler, Masvidal, Cerrone, Condit type of old guard where we've seen the cracks for a while.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, but Jesus, what talent, man! Like, what a fun division this is.
Hell yeah, man! Some featherweight showcases on this undercard. Zabit and Moicano both impressing, and again, credit to the losers, Bochniak and Calvin Kattar, both impressing as well, both doing a perfectly fine job, and in some ways exceeding expectations, especially for Bochniak. But this division is heating up, just like bantamweight, just like lightweight. Many good fights in the relatively near future will be had at 145. Before we move on to Poirier versus Gaethje and the other parts of next week's card, I do want to give a little bit of a shout out to the cornerman of Joe Lauzon. This is probably something we shouldn't have to do in the sport of MMA, but there is an incentive to heavily praise any time a corner decides to stop the fight and save their fighter, and I'm happy that happened. Joe Lauzon was getting lit up by Chris Gritzmacher. He is well past it at this point. Essentially, somebody on Twitter framed it this way. I'm sorry I never remember people's names, but somebody on Twitter did say Lauzon has become Pulver and Gritzmacher was Lauzon in this fight. And that's kind of how it was. Lauzon was doing just enough to stay alive and to keep to not give Tandan any easy excuses to stop the fight, but was getting nothing done, was taking a ton of punishment and couldn't get away. And honestly, if Gritzmacher had thrown more combinations throughout that second round, he could have finished Lauzon outright a hell of a lot sooner. So fight could have still been stopped sooner, but Joe Lauzon's corner saved him from further punishment after the second round. There was absolutely no reason to send him out for a third, so thank you guys for protecting your fighter like you're supposed to. It was good to see.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you very much for bringing that up, Connor. I don't think we can praise enough the stopping the fight thing. That's really excellent.
All too rare in MMA, but definitely needed. And it's good that Lauzon, he got his ass kicked, but not any more than he really needed to, so... Let's close out this segment. When we come back, Dustin Poirier versus Justin Gaethje. Holy shit. Plus, we're going to talk about Israel Adesanya, hot prospect in the UFC's middleweight division, who's taken on Marvin Vettori in a fight that might be a little thorny for him. So we're going to talk about both of those after this. Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are one or two of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. And you can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show. And welcome back to Heavy Hands. Let's move on to next week's card. Where the hell is this taking place? I don't know. What's the other name for it? I don't know. All that matters, Dustin Poirier is fighting Justin Gaethje in the main event, and that is something that everybody should see. Everybody who can stomach any kind of violence should see this fight, because there is absolutely no way in my mind it can be anything less than fun. And it is very, very likely that it will be truly spectacular.
Yeah, because as we've seen, Justin Gaethje early in his career, he just fought guys who didn't know how to not brawl with him. As he's gone on, his big adjustment, the thing that he has figured out how to do over the course of his career is how to make guys brawl with him.
Yes.
And the way that he's learned to do that is via pressure, both kind of mental and physical, tactical, strategic, all of those kinds of pressure. Justin Gaethje piles up on you to force you into his kind of fight. He even managed to force Eddie Alvarez into his kind of fight. Mm-hmm. He didn't win it. And Alvarez, as it turned out, it had too much craft and experience and savvy and turned in literally the performance of his life. Like the best performance of Eddie Alvarez's career. It took all of that to deal with the increasingly technical pressure of Justin Gaethje.
Yep. It took somebody who could stand in front of Justin Gaethje and rattle off 5 body shots in a row. And let's be honest, most of this division ain't doing that kind of thing. So, I do want to say about the technique of Justin Gaethje, because obviously we have to analyze this matchup, tactically, how do these guys respond to each other, blah, blah, blah. I don't want it to be just this is a smashing machine and this is a smashing machine, so the bigger smashing machine will win. That kind of analysis, because there is thought that goes into both of these guys' styles. And I just want to I briefly want to say Justin Gaethje has still not gotten enough credit for how he fought Michael Johnson, for how he surpassed so many people's expectations who were like, oh, the moment he gets into the UFC, the moment he fights someone with fast hands, he's going to get lit up, he's going to get put down. He came into that fight, that for him, like Eddie Alvarez's win over Gaethje was the best showing of Justin Gaethje's career. And he fought that fight perfectly, even though he was the one who got hurt twice leading up to the eventual finish. And it wasn't, Johnson didn't get hurt really until the finish. Gaethje still kept the pressure on Johnson. He consistently did damage even when he wasn't at his preferred range. He poked and prodded between smashing with combinations. He was very tricky and not easy to hit on the chin. Like he would have been finished had his defense, simple and reductive as it is, not been as on point as it was in that fight.
Gaethje really makes you work to get around his defense.
Yes.
Like it's not especially complex, but it is effective. He makes probably the best use we've seen in MMA since the prime Shogun Rua and prime Alistair Overeem years of a double forearms guard.
Yeah.
Really tight guard. Keeps his elbows in nice and close, really covers up his temple and his jaw. You have got to find ways to work around that. You have got to do things to make him bring his hands out of that position in order to effectively hit him.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that as a style of defense if you're using it in the right context, or if your style puts you in a context where like that's a good way to respond to the vast majority of attacks. Like just this last weekend, Jarrett Hurd fought Erislandy Lara in a phenomenal super welterweight boxing match. And like Erislandy Lara, people who know that name, is a really accurate, really effective, and quite powerful counterpuncher. And because Hurd was putting so much pressure on him, he was frequently able to stop the straight left, the best punch of Erislandy Lara, with a high guard. He just smothered it and walked into it, and that pressure was always on, so the technique worked. And he was always firing back after catching a punch on his guard. And that's how Gaethje approached Johnson. It's how he approached Alvarez as well. Looked to continue building on all the improvements we saw in the Johnson fight. It's just that Alvarez had the exact right idea for handling him and responding. And will Dustin Poirier have the same solutions, I guess, is one of the ways we can approach analyzing this as a matchup.
Yeah. So, before we talk about Poirier in this matchup specifically, what do you make of Poirier's game at this point? Like, how would you describe him? What does he do? What does he do well? Where does he still struggle a little bit?
Let's see. Poirier, I really like that Poirier now, as like a veteran, has reinvested in being well-rounded. I like that he has taken Rafael dos Anjos' place in this division, where he's the southpaw pressure fighter who beats you up with combinations and then takes you down and beats you up as you struggle your way back to your feet. And I don't think like Poirier is the best wrestler in this division, but wrestling works so well with his style that it makes him if Poirier gets into his rhythm, very few fighters are able to survive or come back from that. Only the likes of Eddie Alvarez and tough old vets like Jim Miller can stage an effort. But I like the breadth of Poirier's game and how he keeps his options open while constantly attacking. I like, too, that he has enough flexibility. He can fight off the back foot a bit. He can pot shot from range. I don't know how long. I still don't know how long Dustin Poirier can keep that kind of approach up against an opponent like Justin Gaethje. Like, my feeling is still generally that if somebody does bring the fight to him or stand their ground as he's attacking them, he will brawl with them. And it's hard to imagine that doesn't seem like a pretty substantial risk here unless, like Gaethje's chin is now ruined because he was knocked out for the first time.
Yeah, that's who Poirier is. Yeah. Poirier has at various points talked about wanting to be less like that, but I think the key for him, as you pointed to, Connor, is not so much in trying to break himself of that habit as using it to his advantage when possible.
Yes.
As like to having additional tools in his toolbox, the ability to stick and move and dart in and out every once in a while, to kick especially, because he's not that tall, but he is long. for a featherweight. He's like 5'9", but he's got pretty long arms and pretty long legs. He can play effectively on the outside for stretches. He just doesn't really have the temperament to do it.
Right.
When possible, to use that takedown game, because he's so good when he backs his opponent up to the fence. It's a logical step for him, right? You know, you back your opponent up. Yes, you can work them over with punching combinations, or the fence is right there. Duck under, hit a takedown. He's a nasty ground striker. We know that. And he's a pretty good clinch fighter. He's got good knees, that those long arms and long legs, strong hips give him a lot of leverage in those scenarios. He's nasty. He's nasty at every range. Once, you can outwork him at long distance, but it's hard to keep it there. You can hit him in the pocket. He is hittable if you're exchanging punches, but he's got pretty good craft there. He's not a one-note pocket puncher. He's got good rhythm. He mixes things up. He'll double up from one side. He'll take subtle angles at close range, and he can always step forward and clinch you. Where if he's dictating, if he's the one who's grabbing the underhook or grabbing the collar tie, he's pretty hard to deal with.
Yeah, and so this is where we get into the reductive side of things, I think. In actually addressing the matchup, is it possible, Pat, to not look at this and be like, oh, it's the one guy versus the southpaw version of the same guy? It's two guys who are good in the clinch, good pressuring, have huge power in both hands, effective low kickers at long range. Like, what are the differences between Gaethje and Poirier that will determine this matchup in your mind?
I think Gaethje is a little more attritive. I think his ability to work the legs and to a lesser extent the body if this fight goes long, will play a role. I think that's point number one. The matchup specific thing, given that Poirier is a southpaw, that comes into play is that Gaethje does not hesitate to throw a lead right. A lot of guys, when they're fighting a southpaw, they really think hard about throwing that right hand. And as we saw against Michael Johnson, Gaethje does not. If he's there, if he's in range, he's firing that shot over and over and over and over again. Whenever he gets the opportunity, it's there. And he'll jab a southpaw a little bit too.
Yeah, even as a jab, he'll throw that lead right. That was something he did really well against Johnson, was not just loading up and bombing with that shot, but turning his shoulders to present the right arm and just popping it out there just to test where the openings would be if he did load up on it. And yeah, I agree with you. The consistency with which Gaethje attacks all targets is a big part of his success. Even as he was a much rougher version of himself, people would have very good rounds against Justin Gaethje and still get knocked out by leg kicks or by a prolonged clinch attack in the third or fourth rounds. And that's going to be a problem for a guy like Poirier. I still imagine too that there is a slight durability difference between them. This is very reductive and can't address the complexity of what leads to a knockout. But Michael Johnson hit both these dudes with the same damn shot, the exact same punch off the overhand left, big right uppercut, Johnson's most dangerous punch in my opinion, and it ended Dustin Poirier's night, and it made Justin Gaethje mad. It certainly turned off the nervous system that made his legs work for a split second, but it did not break Justin Gaethje. And I think you still probably got to be more like Eddie Alvarez to break Justin Gaethje, not the guy who was kind of starting to lose to Eddie Alvarez after picking him apart at long range. I just think Dustin's going to get dragged into that fight almost right away because I don't think Gaethje knows any other way of fighting, and durability and consistent attrition seems to favor Gaethje.
Yeah, and I think kind of comfort in multi-sided exchanges too, right? Like this is I think is the biggest reason why I'm picking Gaethje in this fight, is because we know Gaethje has been in pocket wars before and is comfortable being there and having guys throw back at him. He knows what that's like. Poirier is used to being the one who's dictating those exchanges because guys don't want to be in the pocket with him. Yeah. Right. Like, whereas Gaethje has fought so many guys at this point who are either willing to exchange with him or accept it as a given that he's not going to get rattled by that. And not that I think Poirier is a rattleable fighter, but Poirier does have moments where you sting him with a shot in the pocket and he stops to think about it, right? Yeah. It doesn't stop him altogether, but like Anthony Pettis stung him with a couple of real nice counters, and Poirier kind of backed off and rethought, and he's like, okay, now I'm going to mix things up. I'm going to try this instead of that. I'm going to dig a little down into my bag of tricks. And I don't know against Justin Gaethje if you have the luxury of doing that.
Yeah, he'll also like, this is sort of counterintuitive, but Poirier will also sometimes, he'll take a shot when he's attacking and then attack twice as hard. Like he throws back, and it's like, it's always up to Justin Gaethje if he brawls. Now that's easy to say because he's always brawling, but he also, like, if he takes a hard shot, he'll cover up and survive and let you waste some energy trying to finish him. He will do the smart thing and then come back and start picking his shots Robbie Lawler style once your arms grow a little heavy and he's not down yet. Poirier will start swinging and banging. He will start brawling without thought, just thinking, okay, it's throwdown time. I got to win or I'm going to lose. And Gaethje does not accept that kind of game. He relies on his toughness, but he does an underrated and remarkably effective job of constantly forcing the engagements he wants, the fight he needs, and keeping himself on track to eventually win. He's super Derek Lewis. Where, like, if Derek Lewis had all these skills to go along with massive power and all this experience and was constantly zeroed in on what he needed to do to win, Justin Gaethje is always working towards the point in the fight at which he can put you away. Whereas Dustin Poirier is sometimes fighting at your behest. So, yeah.
I think very highly of Dustin Poirier as a fighter. Yeah. I want to make that very clear. Like, I think he has really found himself in his last few fights. He's hellaciously fun to watch. He's extremely skilled. This just strikes me as kind of a bad matchup for him. And maybe, he is crafty in the pocket. Like, he's real crafty there. He's got a lot of layers to what he can do. Probably more than Eddie Alvarez does in terms of mixing his shots up, picking and choosing the right things, going lever punching, changing angles. Like, he's very, very good at that. So if there's a guy in this division who can be in extended exchanges with Justin Gaethje and outskill him there, it's probably Poirier. If anybody can do it, I think it's Poirier. McGregor probably has the best shot if he were to ever fight Gaethje, which I don't think he ever would, of landing the one hitter quitter, like that one good clean shot to put him down. But in extended exchanges, it was either Alvarez, and we saw him do it, or it's going to be Poirier. So, I think I see Poirier's path, which is not going to be sticking and moving on the outside. Yeah. It's going to be in exchanges. But I think you're probably right, Connor, in that Gaethje is just a little more comfortable in that space. I think if it comes down to a clinch war too, I think Gaethje probably has a little edge there.
Yeah, and Dustin's not going to – Dustin's wrestling always comes off his pressure anyway, but he's not really going to be able to use wrestling against Gaethje, who is a very good defensive wrestler and equally nightmarish in the clinch. So like it's going to be a relatively even fight in a lot of ways because of how dangerous and effective inside both of these guys are. But it's probably going to end up being Gaethje applying the pressure and Poirier fighting a little more reactively. Still going to be a damn brawl. So Poirier is absolutely still in the running because he's a damn good brawler. But we got to play the averages here, play the odds, and the odds, in my mind, suggest that this is a fairly good matchup for Gaethje, at least as far as any matchup can be good for Gaethje because he's always going to war. So both of us liking Justin Gaethje. The highlight to get back on the winning track with that one. We got one more fight from this card to talk about. As I said before, Israel Adesanya. We did have a chance to talk about him after his UFC debut that impressed a lot of people. And he has since been quite the presence on social media, seems poised to be a star, but not yet, I would say. Like, careful, don't label him too soon. And this matchup against Marvin Vettori is a perfect one, I think, to determine whether or not we should really get hyped about Israel Adesanya's chances in the UFC and not just his potential. Or if we have to reevaluate how much time he needs before he's ready to start taking on the top 10.
Yeah, we have a lot of questions about Israel Adesanya. Yeah. We know a fair bit because there's a huge library of tape available on him in basically every combat sport imaginable.
Yeah.
He's got 12 MMA fights. He had his first pro MMA fight in 2012, so he's been at this a while. It's not like he is a novice grappler or wrestler at this point. And you can see in his responses in the cage when guys try to grapple or wrestle with him, it's not like he has no idea what he's doing. What Marvin Vettori is going to do is going to come out, he's going to pressure. Adesanya. He's going to throw combinations at him. He's going to try to push him back toward the fence, and he's either going to tee off with punches or, more likely in this matchup, he's going to try to take Adesanya down. Vettori's tough. He's got power in his hands. He works a great pace. He is not a pushover here. This is not a matchup that was made for Israel Adesanya to style on this dude. This is a let's figure out what Israel Adesanya has to offer fight.
Vettori is a perfect fighter for that kind of matchup. Like against a wide variety of styles, Vettori is just well-rounded enough. He's super durable. He fights he pushes a really hard pace. If you have almost any of like the most common questions about an up-and-comer, a guy like Marvin Vettori is a very good pick to test those questions. What do you make of this matchup? Like, what problem specifically does Vettori pose for a guy like Adesanya? And then we'll get into whether or not we see Adesanya overcoming them.
I think the biggest one is going to be the pressure, where Adesanya, despite having really good footwork, being very long, knowing how to maintain a distance, is sometimes lackadaisical about getting out of bad positions or getting off the fence. Yeah. Where he is so confident in his ability to just destroy you one shot or two shots at a time that he doesn't think he needs to. He doesn't really fight like he seems to need to maximize his time to make that happen. You know. Like if you back him up to the fence and you're just kind of pressing him there, he'll just kind of hang out. As long as you're not doing much, Adesanya will take that as an opportunity to not do much himself. He's not the kind of guy where you back him up, you grab an underhook, you're driving your head into his chin, where he's going to immediately look to dig an underhook of his own and spin off and create space. Right. Like he'll lose minutes of a fight in these positions. We saw that against a guy who frankly is not that good in Rob Wilkinson. Marvin Vettori is much better at that and much more dangerous, fights with much more urgency. And unlike Rob Wilkinson kind of got shocked and flustered past a certain point and just backed up and let Adesanya tee off on him. And Vettori's not going to do that. Vettori is going to make Adesanya fight him. And so that leads to two possible outcomes. One is that Vettori just overwhelms him with pressure and kind of relentless takedowns and combinations in the pocket, and Adesanya just kind of gets outworked and beaten up, maybe finished on the mat. The other opportunity here is that constant pressure and volume and activity forces Adesanya out of that, kind of snaps him out of it and makes him respond to that. We know he can just lace Vettori with counters if he wants to. If he feels like doing that, we know he can put more volume out there than he has chosen to in his last couple of fights. Maybe Vettori forces him into that pace, and we see a lot more urgency out of Adesanya.
Yeah, that is my hope. I think that should be the hope of everyone, is that we have this pot shotter, this counter puncher in Adesanya, much like, again, Arislandi Lara did this last weekend. You put enough pressure on a guy like that, you like to see him turn into, go from thinking like, oh, I'm in control to thinking, okay, where are my openings? Start eyeing up his opportunities and seeing those attacks as chances to get himself into the fight. But even in his kickboxing bouts, Adesanya has often been like a slow starter, doesn't seem to really capture that vibe, but he does kind of have to be convinced to fight a lot of the time. He kind of just seems to start his bouts expecting his opponent to respect his range, to respect his reach and his counters, and is a little lackadaisical in responding to that early pressure, to those early onslaughts, just kind of casually leaning and swaying away, looking. It's all about like the affect. It's all about giving the other guy the impression that you're in control, that nothing is bothering you, but you can go a little too hard in playing that part with a guy like Marvin Vettori, who can not only put a lot of pressure on you with strikes and throw combinations and keep doing it for 15 minutes, but who can take you down and scramble all over you on the ground as well. And who has faced like highly touted, hyped fighters before as a relatively inexperienced fighter himself and come through. So, what do you make of it? Because I'll tell you, I'm kind of leaning towards Vettori here. I am not sold on Adesanya's ground game at all. We have seen him scramble wildly free from things, but we have not seen him locked down by a very skilled top player. And Vettori may not be the best top player in the world, but let's remember, jiu-jitsu is his thing. He has only recently begun adding all of this quite impressive striking to his game under Rafael Cordero, but he is really a submission artist at heart. So I imagine that avenue is open to him. Kind of makes me feel like he's going to be able to put on that pressure. He's going to be able to control where this fight takes place. That Adesanya is going to... It'll sort of be a Stephen Thompson versus Matt Brown kind of moment for Adesanya, hopefully.
Yeah, I think that sounds about right to me. Man, I'm trying to think how to put this here. Like, if I were betting this fight, I would be betting Marvin Vettori as a 2-1 underdog. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like he's +2. I think he's what? He's plus 195, plus 204, plus 210. Like, if I were betting this fight, I would be betting on Marvin Vettori. I think his path to victory is just so shockingly clear here that it's hard not to think that he's got a good shot at it.
It'd be a surprise if under Rafael Cordero he doesn't come into this fight knowing that path to victory too.
Especially because, you know what, I think I'm going to take Vettori as well, because I think we've seen from Adesanya, not just in MMA, in kickboxing too, he does not like pressure. He doesn't like guys getting in his face. It's not that he doesn't have options there, but Adesanya is really the kind of guy who feels most comfortable throwing 8, 10, 12 strikes a minute and filling up the remainder of that space with feinting, but he needs to be in control to make that kind of fight happen. I don't think he's a dude who's built to kind of brawl 25 strikes a minute up against the cage while fending off takedowns. Like, that's not to say he couldn't do that, but it would require things that we have no reason to believe that he's capable of doing.
Yeah. He not only, he doesn't like to be pressured, but we have enough evidence to believe that he sort of expects you at this point not to pressure him too much. Or at least wants to like play the part of somebody like, oh, look at this guy. He's so calm and relaxed. I'm intimidated. I'm not going to pressure him. I just think Vettori's going to come out and do the thing. Irrespective of how Adesanya looks or feels, he's just going to probably come out there and start plugging away. He'll take some shots. He may very well wake Adesanya up, and that could turn into an Adesanya win. Even if it doesn't, I want to see how Adesanya responds to this. But yeah, like Vettori can do a lot of stuff, and he's a solid, well-built fighter. So
yeah, I think the strength thing too. Like, Vettori is built like a brick shithouse. Yes. And if he locks up with Adesanya in those same kinds of spaces that Rob Wilkinson did, I think Vettori is going to send this dude flying. So yeah, I would like to see Adesanya become the dude. I think this division could use a guy like him. He's got tons of personality. He's really fun. He's a sharp striker. But yeah, this just kind of strikes me as one of those matchups that, and maybe a year down the road, this is a fight that Adesanya comfortably wins. But based on what we've seen from Adesanya so far, unless his takedown defense has drastically improved and his sense of urgency has drastically improved, and he really gets proactive about setting the distance, then
it's part of the process though. Matchups like this, like, it's still, either way, it'll still probably be a good thing, because if he is going to be able to turn that corner and does lose this fight, again, that's why I compare it to Wonderboy versus Matt Brown. Like, Wonderboy needed that fight to realize all the holes that needed shoring up, and perhaps after this, Vettori wins as we expect, and Adesanya's like, maybe I should start wrestling with that Robert Whittaker fella who lives nearby, and then we see the best that Adesanya has to offer. So either way, it'll all work out in the end. Combat sports stories always have happy endings in combat sports, don't they? So let's look forward to that. Otherwise, that's pretty much it for our show. Thank you all for listening. UFC 223 was insane. The week leading up to it was crazier than almost anything I've experienced since I started covering this sport. But the card delivered. We have a lot of new storylines still to attach ourselves to going forward. And next week, man, there is going to be some special violence on display. Before we wrap up, Pat, what do you have coming out this week?
I have a brand new episode of fucking dog, man. She does not want you to plug your shit. God damn, Lucy, you need to go back in the kitchen? You asshole.
She does. I mean, does she have a competing project out there? I mean, what's the deal? As soon as you start plugging your shit, she loses it.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. She's got a YouTube series that she's real.
You shouldn't allow this. Your house, your rules, Pat.
This is some bullshit. Yeah. I have a new episode of Tides of History coming out. This is on Christopher Columbus and Vasco da Gama and the Age of Exploration.
Nice.
I think it was a lot of fun to put together. You get to talk about Columbus as a simultaneous kind of genius and also imbecile, just an idiot who was really bad at lots of things and who was also pretty good at a few others, while not caring a whole lot about the human consequences of his actions. That was a lot of fun to put together.
Many of history's greatest monsters were shocking idiots, weren't they?
Some of them, yeah. Others, yeah. I mean, lots of them were, but like just people in general. This is one of my favorite things about history, is that you realize like the idea of, these past folks as geniuses, these incredibly sharp guys. Like Thomas Jefferson believed a lot of real stupid shit, a lot of real dumb shit.
You're entering into the Mac argument from It's Always Sunny. All these science bitches, they've all been wrong, so why should we trust anything they have to say?
Yeah, he ain't wrong about that.
All right, so Christopher Columbus is a bitch. Tune in to Tides of History this week to hear Dr. Patrick Wyman say it with his own mouth.
Correct.
As for me, I'm working on a little piece now that's just about done, so that should probably have already been published by the time you're hearing this, but working title is UFC 223, A Tale of Short-Term Profit, just sort of a rundown of all the shit that happened this week, and more importantly, how the UFC and Dana White responded to it, and how, after all of this madness, they really, really come out on top. Not paying bonuses, saving money any way they can, still selling out the venue despite the event changes, and now having what may very well be their biggest matchup ever from a pay-per-view standpoint on the near horizon. So UFC did just fine. Dana White is making green still, and it's about that. And then I'm going to try to do something. I don't know if I'll have time this week. If you've listened to this show before, you know that many of the things I say are coming out don't always come to fruition. But I am working on also an analysis of Jędrzejczyk Namajunas, because it was awesome. And I want to break that one down round by round, go through all of the interesting exchanges, and give everyone an idea of how good both of these women really are at face punching. But anyway, speaking of that, this has been Heavy Hands. Thank you guys for listening. You find us on social media if you have any questions or concerns. Twitter is usually the best place for both of us. You can find me at Boxing Bush, that's BUSCH, and Pat is at Patrick_Wyman. You can also find us both on Facebook.com/either Patrick Wyman MMA or Connor Ruebusch MMA. And otherwise, make sure you check out our Patreon. We are going to have bonus episodes. We just had a new episode of The Underdogs with Phil McKenzie come out last week. A couple of the fights we discussed were messed with or scrapped, but we also got a chance to celebrate the career of the recently retired journeyman legend Mike Pyle. And there's all kinds of other stuff on our Patreon as well, so check that out. And if you all came here today for the finer points of face punching, you came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands.